It's like a war zone here, folks. Hey everyone, I'm here at LTX with Jay from JayzTwoCents, and we're going to be talking about water cooling, specifically common or major mistakes that the manufacturers make rather than common mistakes the consumers make.
Right.
Because you said before we started filming, I thought a good thing, which was the manufacturers sort of set the consumers up for failure in some instances.
That's true.
Before that, this video is brought to you by Dollar Shave Club's Daily Essentials Starter Set. This full grooming kit ships at $5 and includes trial-sized versions of the company's popular shave butter, body wash, and wipes, and also includes a solid, high-quality razor and a full set of cartridges. Go to dollarshaveclub.com/gamersnexus to get the Daily Essentials Starter Kit for just $5 and with free shipping, or click the link below.
So I've got about 18 years of water cooling experience, and to back up that claim of mine, we were using parts that weren't meant to be used in computers way back when. We were taking heater cores out of junkyards, turning them into heat exchangers. We were just taking regular 120 millimeter or even 200 millimeter fans from like the old Cooler Master cases and stuff. Aquarium water pumps, vinyl tubing from Lowe's, like everything was wrong, right? And just using straight distilled water. And I remember thinking we didn't deal with clogs and failures and stuff back then, even with mixed metals.
Right.
Because I think what's happened over time is I realized over the last, let's say 2.5, 3 years, I've seen more water cooling failures in terms of gunking up and clogging than I have in the last 15 prior to that. And it really gets me to thinking that a lot of the companies that are kind of trying to push themselves into market into this new, it's not even new, but water cooling is much more mainstream than it used to be. And I think they all want a piece of that pie, and what they're doing is unfortunately cutting a lot of corners, lacking a lot of long-term testing. And so what happens is, as a consumer, you think you're getting a product that's ready for prime time that may not have been, like specifically like the Primo Chill View thing.
Yeah.
So that's the basis of my claim is we didn't see these types of failures in the day.
Yeah, and I could already see comments arguing that, well, but it's more mainstream now. But the point is, as it's gotten more mainstream,
right,
manufacturers, I think some of them have gotten sloppier in creating the product because people are going to buy it anyway.
It's yields, right?
Yeah.
It's yields. You sell more units, make more units at the lesser cost, make more profit. And the problem is you'll start to see people cutting corners and using lower grade copper, higher oxidization levels, and what happens is there's dirty copper, there's coppers with all sorts of zincs and alloys and other things in there that are potentially contaminants if the fluid that you're using is not meant to be able to inhibit those types of corrosions. And so what happens is you get these products that are not necessarily compatible. And the reason why we didn't have these problems in the past was just because of plain distilled water.
Yeah.
And most people have moved away from that because I remember the early days, I can't remember the product name now, it's been too long, but there was the first like non-conductive fluid. And it was actually the very first water cooling test I ever conducted. I actually did it on hard form, I was a long-term member there, and I had a loop that I used for 6 years that had never been serviced. I'd never flushed it, never drained it, never replaced it. The tubing turned from clear to like a peach color. It was really weird. It was a green coolant, but it turned peach. But what I wanted to see was how conductive did this turn over time. As it's running over metals, it's picking up ions and contaminants and becoming conductive. So I took my multimeter and I tested it at various distances, like in the bowl, obviously, same depth.
Sure.
And surprisingly, it was fairly conductive up to 6 inches away, which is at that point, any leak, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So that really started the discussion of even the non-conductive fluids are only a temporary solution.
Yeah, and so my question for you then, as a genuine question, not just pitching it for camera, but if there is a concern of how long the fluids are in the loop, how much of that do we put on the consumers? So like a car, right? At some point, it's your fault for not taking care of it.
Right.
So at what point do we pass into it is the consumer's fault for not taking care of it versus the manufacturer just didn't think it through enough?
Well, I mean, there's general rule of thumb and then there's manufacturer recommendations, which it's funny because the manufacturer recommendation usually is a much longer term than my rule of thumb. And we got another float plane coming in, no pun intended. And that is because of the fact that I tend to annually change my fluids. Spoiler though, I haven't changed skunkworks in 2 years because I'm still long-term testing the green fluid because I was dealing with the color change on yellow and orange. After 2 years, the green has not changed color on me. That's a perfect cut.
So 2 years it hasn't changed color.
2 years it hasn't changed color, but the funny part is, and that's a Mayhem's pastel. And the thing is, they'll say it's got a 5-year shelf life, I think it is, and recommended 2+ years to be able to run in your system. So that's falling within that recommendation. But any systems I build for friends or family, I live and die by the 1 year rule. 6 months on distilled water if it's just got a PT nuke or a kill coil, or a 1 year if it's some sort of like a premix, and I'm not adding any additives to it. But then you have like silver kill coil is something I want to talk about.
Okay.
The kill coil, the silver is an anti-corrosive, right? And the problem is though the silver becomes an issue and responds and reacts to various types of metals that you may not be aware in your radiator or your block and stuff, because you start to get these lower end companies like from China and a lot of these no-name brands that are cutting corners using lesser quality alloys, that then the silver actually becomes the problem in the loop. So you think you're doing the typical, this is the right way, and you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
Because again, confusion in the market, because now everyone wants to be a water cooling supplier, and all you've done is create this just mass confusion of parts compatibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing also that's worth going over is just as vendors like
incoming.
As vendors have tried to expand their market reach, you've got companies like EK doing aluminum for loops now and stuff like that, and that's
but they're doing it the
fine.
right way.
Yeah, because it's all aluminum.
Because it's all aluminum, all the way down to the fittings.
Right.
What a lot of people don't realize is they're concerned about mixed metals. All AIOs are mixed metal.
Yeah.
I mean, all of them are pretty much running either Acetec aluminum rads or some other aluminum radiator with.
And they also have biocides in them too.
And somebody asked me that earlier that I met here at LTX. It was the one question they had. They're like, you say mixed metals is bad, but what about AIOs? I say, that pump is probably going to die long before then you'll come across galvanic corrosion, because the fluid is sealed and formulated for that setup, if done right anyway.
Yeah.
But the problem is, a lot of people don't realize like fittings and stuff, those are brass. Those are brass fittings with nickel plating on them. The nickel usually will eat away on the inside of the fitting, or it may not be plated at all, it might just be on the outside. So you already have fluid touching brass and then nickel, bare copper. I mean, you are in a mixed metal situation almost no matter what.
Almost always, yeah.
Aluminum's the one people freak out about, right? Because
they freak out about it for a lot of reasons, and like one of them is thermal conductivity too. And we've actually tested a like 1-to-1 comparison of copper versus aluminum.
Electrolysis.
I just did straight thermal benchmarking with an identical system, and it's pretty hard to find a difference in a lot of instances.
Right.
So like there's definitely a thermal difference in terms of heat capacity and stuff like that, because the thermal conductivity of copper is 2 times of what it is on aluminum.
Yeah.
But to actually gain anything out of that, you need to have a hell of a lot of
The thing
heat.
is but that's at max thermal capacity and thermal transfer rate. And our PCs and the temperatures at which we're conducting, the actual transfer of heat is far below that headroom. So you're not going to usually find.
You have other bottlenecks too.
Right, because people look at that data and they say, well, that means an aluminum loop's going to be twice as hot as a copper loop, and that's just not true.
No.
But I think people freak out about aluminum unnecessarily unless. See, the thing about the 240G kit and stuff from EK is the fact that it's the same grade of aluminum being used. Because just like anything else, there's so many different grades and alloys of aluminum. And you start mixing those, you can have a problem. But every single car on the planet has mixed metal loops running all day long. And the reason why they don't fail is because they have a regular service schedule and they have a fluid that is designed for that automotive application, which is why you'll see GM recommend one thing, Chrysler recommend another, Nissan recommend another. And the important thing is you have to at least know the recommendations for the parts you're using.
Right. On the manufacturer side, other than fluids, is there anything that has caused you concern lately or that you've disliked from vendors who make these components? We've got a couple components, right? We have pumps, we have cold plates.
Fittings are a big one for me.
Fittings? Why fittings?
Everyone wants to have a rotary fitting now of some sort. And Bits Power is still my go-to because and fun fact, they have never sponsored a single fitting for me. I actually get most of those from performance PCs, and because they are the most expensive fittings on the market, but they have the tightest fitting, the best tolerances in terms of having O-ring. So any O-ring you add to your system is another point of failure, which is a potential concern.
Right.
You start dealing with double rotary 90s or just a single rotary 90 or 45, and you start adding those, each one of those junctions becomes a place it can leak. So because they have the best failure rate, everything fails. Everything's got a failure rate, guys. But because their spec is so tight and the tolerances are so good, sometimes it's hard to turn them. I use them specifically for that reason. Because you have a lot of people that copy the best, and you have a lot of the knockoff brands and the China brands and Shenzhen and all that stuff,
Right.
making these components that are look-alike for the main real deal. They're a lot looser. They don't fit as tight. And I've seen so many of these fittings fail in a system that's not moving. Just it's together, it's not moving, you're not touching it, and just over time, they use all the way down to they cheap out on the quality of the O-ring material. You've seen the red O-rings and the brown
Right,
O-rings,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Each of those are a different type of material. And the reason why you see fittings be expensive is because they're not cutting the corners. And that falls on the manufacturer. You could do everything right, put your system together 100% correct, but it failed because of a substandard material that was used.
Exactly, yeah, which is a problem in a lot of places too. So I guess if anyone's had second guesses about overpaying for fittings or something, or any component in a loop, there's a reason you pay so much. Another thing too is just they're low volume parts,
Right.
ultimately.
Right.
Liquid cooling has grown a lot. Certainly your channel is proof of that. And it's still though a much lower volume than anything else we work with in terms of like,
Right.
Hyper 212s.
Yeah.
Probably millions of those have been made.
Yep. And it's unfortunate though that a lot of people are afraid to do their custom loops because of the idea of these failures.
Yeah. Okay, so then closing this one out, to that point of people being afraid of doing custom loops because of failures, even with like CLCs, you see this too. You know? I guess I should first know anytime there's a failure, you're way more likely to hear about it than if it's a success.
Right.
Like Paul talked about a loop failure, I've talked about loop failures, and you hear about those because it's like a catastrophic event.
I've been fortunate enough to not have a catastrophic like explosion of a fitting.
Right.
Like, and that's why I say fittings is the other frustrating thing is in both of those instances. See, Paul's failure was fluid related, and one we already talked about with the View. Kyle's failure was specifically with a fitting that just randomly popped off, and that again comes down to material of the O-rings, how tight are they?
Yeah.
One of the reasons I use Primo Chill so much on my revolver fittings for hardline is because they have the tightest seal. They have two O-rings, and when they seal, you have one that's responsible just for the seal, you have another one that's responsible for the bite on the collar so that it can't slip out.
So then should people actually be afraid of building an open loop?
It's the same thing I tell anyone that asks me that question is if you're willing to assume the risk, there's always some level of risk. For me, it's an enthusiast thing. I feel like the efficiency of the hardware, the temperatures that have reduced, and how good vapor chambers have become and how good air coolers have become, it's not necessary for 99% of the people out there. I still do it because it's just an enthusiast thing for me. But if you are willing to assume the highly unlikely event of a catastrophic leak, then yeah, I highly recommend it. Should you be nervous? I'm always nervous. I mean, all my loop, every system I have is water cooled. And even our business systems, which is probably not the smartest move because in terms of maintenance and stuff. Yeah, I don't think you should be afraid, honestly.
So if you want to see more of this, check out Jay's channel, JayzTwoCents. We'll link him below.
Thank you.
Jay, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Good
We'll
discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see you all next time.
Thank you.